This is lecture number DR049AA05. It is the 49th lecture of the Mega Genius Lectures and the 5th lecture of the Advanced Abilities series. It was recorded on September 1st, 2016. The title of this lecture is Einstein's Conclusion. It is 22 minutes long. Copyright 2007, 2011, and 2016 by Mega Genius Incorporated. All rights reserved. This lecture is protected by internationally valid copyright. It may not in whole or in part be duplicated, transmitted, or otherwise reproduced without the express permission of Mega Genius Incorporated. Unauthorized translation, importation, or distribution is a violation of applicable laws. Mega Genius is a United States federally registered trademark and service mark. And now, here is Mega Genius.
The late English author Douglas Adams noted, quote, "In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move," unquote. The theoretical physicist Albert Einstein, who also dealt with universal concepts, contemplated the human emotion of anger. And before I share his conclusion with you, let's begin a brief journey of enlightenment on this subject by clarifying the difference between being annoyed, angered, and enraged. A young girl asked her father, "Dad, what is the difference between anger and rage?" And her father replied, "It's just a matter of degree. Let me show you what I mean." Then he went to the telephone, put it on the speaker so that his daughter could hear, and dialed a number at random. And to the man who answered his telephone, the girl's father said, "Hello, is Melvin there?" The man answered, "There is no one living here named Melvin. Why don't you learn to look up numbers before you dial them?" Then the man disconnected the call. "See," the father told his daughter, "now, that man was not happy with our call. He was probably busy and we annoyed him. Now listen." Then the father dialed the same number again. "Hello," he said, "is Melvin there?" "Now look here," came the testy reply. "You just called this number and I told you that there is no Melvin here. Don't call this number again." Then the man disconnected the call abruptly. Then the father turned to his daughter and said, "You see, that was anger. Now I'll show you what rage is like." He dialed the same number again, and when a stern voice shouted, "Hello," the father calmly said, "Hello, this is Melvin. Have there been any calls for me?" Anger can easily be humorous, but too often it does not seem to be. Many emotions are demure and reserved, such as mild interest, monotony, and sympathy, but not anger. It can explode upon your life like a fireball, skyrocket your blood pressure, ruin your relationships, and rob you of sleep. In an instant, it can plunge you into litigation, lawyers' fees, financial ruin, and prison. Anger can even be a premature ticket to your grave. I'm sure you realize that in these times of elevated stress, road rage, and court-ordered anger management classes, almost anything that you do or do not do may annoy someone else and perhaps incur his wrath. People often become angry over utter insignificance. If your opinion about anything differs from that of the next fellow, just expressing it may make him livid. For instance, I know two women who shared a long-time friendship, who once argued about whether ham was mostly pink or white, until they became so enraged that they refused to speak to one another for 7 years. Neither was willing to allow the other to have an insignificant but different opinion. That was all it took. I have no anger toward anyone in the world, but the emotion still intrudes upon my doorstep. I once watched a girl about 10 years of age react even worse in public than the man would have if he had received yet another call from Melvin. The young girl, I'll call Kathy, had been playing skee-ball, which is an arcade game invented in the early 1900s, somewhat similar to a miniature form of bowling on a machine. It is classified as a redemption game, as the player can win tickets that are redeemable for customarily inexpensive prizes. Well, Kathy wanted to redeem her tickets for a miniature tea set, but her mother thought that a stuffed animal toy would be more appropriate. When the mother finally decreed that Kathy could not waste her tickets on the miniature tea set, which was a bad parenting move, the child detonated, and a full-blown nuclear meltdown occurred outside the arcade at the Santa Monica Pier. The only thing that I could compare her reaction to would be some special effects from the 1973 American supernatural horror film, The Exorcist, named the scariest film of all time by Entertainment Weekly. Now let's move ahead 30 years and add that I have seldom seen Kathy since the meltdown, and add my admission that my immodesty and communicative nature sometimes gores someone's bull. In a restaurant with Kathy again, then 40 years of age, the woman launched into a pyrotechnic show directly at me, spewing more rage than I had seen since George C. Scott slapped a hospitalized soldier in the 1970 Academy Award-winning film Patton. In fact, I now feel a fellowship with that shell-shocked combatant. But while I sat silently, Kathy, with flashing eyes and trembling lips, shouted, wept, and berated me for an hour, finally decreeing repeatedly that neither of us must ever speak to the other again. And while she was taking a breath, I instantly agreed. There were two reasons that I permitted her to dramatize for so long. First, she was a house guest to whom I wanted to remain hospitable. Second, although I felt sorry for her, I was interested in how long she could maintain her uncontrolled fury, the likes of which I had not encountered for 30 years, since that day at the Santa Monica Pier. If you are used to tirades, you should associate with a more mentally stable class of friends. Kathy and I did not have an argument, you understand. There was no two-way communication. She had a diatribe. Although I could easily have resolved her rage within moments, I confess that I let this woman, whom I still love, maintain the anger that she so fervently created for three reasons. First, it would not have been helpful to her if I had rewarded her for bad behavior. Second, she deserved the opportunity to think about her actions later when she was calm and accept responsibility for her conduct. Third, she deserved the opportunity to learn this priceless lesson. He who angers you controls you. What crime had I committed that made her so angry and me so unforgivable? Had I injured her family or her home or her? No. Kathy's sole complaint to me was that I had confidentially told her husband that I was unimpressed with one aspect of their teenage daughter's secondary school education. I had not criticized Kathy's daughter, you understand, just privately expressed the fact that I was unimpressed with a facet of her child's schooling. You see, my crime was that I had expressed a minor opinion, similar to one about the color of ham, that Kathy was unwilling to allow me to have. That was all it took. Now, one of the reasons that I've told you the story about Kathy is to point out one of the dangers of harboring anger. Most people shift their emotions around. They're amused one moment, they're concerned the next, then disinterested, bored, angry, cheerful, thrilled, and so on. But the more mentally stable a person is, the more he will tend to remain cheerful or otherwise happy most of the time. Some people get stuck in an unhappy state for various reasons. For instance, a friend of mine, I'll call her Cynthia, had been married to a fellow I'll call Jason for only a few years when he died. But Cynthia told me that Jason had been the love of her life. For years after that, Cynthia just could not get over the death of Jason. She was stuck in the emotion of grief. One day, while Cynthia was talking with a friend of hers about the wonderful marriage that she and Jason had enjoyed, Cynthia mentioned, quote, "Well, you know, when we died," unquote, at which point the friend stopped Cynthia and said, quote, "Did you hear what you just said, Cynthia? You said, 'when we died.' You didn't die, Cynthia, only Jason did," unquote. And Cynthia told me later that at that instant, she realized that she had not died when Jason did, although she had felt as if she had. She said, "Suddenly I was able to step out of my grief and finally leave it all behind." Sometimes a person will spend so much time in anger that it becomes the emotion of their life, the emotion in which they function, quote, "normally," unquote. You may very well know such a person. Perhaps Kathy, who did not get her miniature tea set decades ago, is such a person today. Anger is defined as a strong feeling of displeasure. Because you probably become angry occasionally, and because some others undoubtedly have become angry with you occasionally, it is a subject worth examining intelligently. The more you understand anger, the more humorous angry people will seem, because you will be amused by their irrationality, which you will understand. Your levels of awareness and abilities rise and fall together. Therefore, it is important that you remember this. To the degree that you increase your understanding of anger, you increase your ability to control it. Here are 6 important keys that you should know about this emotion. The first important key to know about anger is that at the instant that a person becomes angry about anything, he makes the decision to be angry. In that split second, he decides that he has a right to be angry and that he is going to be angry right then. He cannot become angry without making the decision to be angry. Of course, if he is alert, he can catch himself deciding to be angry. Then he can choose not to decide to be angry at that time. Not becoming angry will not immediately resolve the circumstance, but becoming angry, becoming angry is never an intelligent solution. Anyone resolves an unwanted situation best when he is acting rationally. Any action that you can take when you are angry, you can take later when you are not angry, if you so choose. The second important key to know about anger is that it occupies a key position in a person's emotional range, meaning the sequence of various emotions that people experience. Think of the range as like a ladder that ranges from pronounced happiness downward through being cheerful, feeling monotony, being angry, and feeling sad, to name just a few of the emotions, of which there are dozens. In the midst of all the emotions is anger, which is closely associated with hatred. For the purposes of this lecture, what is important is that we realize that dead center of all the normal emotions is anger, and that it is the primary emotion at which irrationality kicks in. At boredom, one is, bored. Ho-hum. However, just one notch lower at anger, relatively rational thought processes begin to become unbalanced and jumbled, and behavior becomes illogical, foolish, and unintelligent. Always remember that anger is the point at which a person toggles his main switch of rational thought and behavior to the off position. Keeping that in mind will enable you to understand much about the illogical aspects of your relationships with others and about other people's relationships with others. The third important key to know about anger is that you should never trust a person while he or she is angry, for that person will not only communicate less effectively, but will exhibit a lower level of control, responsibility, and ethics. Here is why. For a person to become angry with you, 6 things must happen. A, he must fail to communicate effectively. All troublesome conditions begin with ineffective communication. B, he must misunderstand something. All misunderstanding results from ineffective communication. C, he must consider that he has failed to control someone or something. Anyone who considers that he has sufficient control of people and objects in his environment has nothing about which to be angry. D, he must consider that he is the unwanted effect of someone or something. Unless he considers that he is an unwanted effect, he has nothing about which to be angry. 6, he must shirk responsibility by considering that someone else or something else is in control. You see, another person can only be angry with you to the extent that he shirks responsibility by considering that you are, or have been, running the show, and that there has been nothing that he could do about it. If he admits that he caused the effect upon himself, even if it was by accident, then there is no one else or anything else with which to be angry. If he admits that he has even a little responsibility for what has happened, then he cannot blame you without also blaming himself, which is a road that an angry person will never travel far. By denying responsibility, he excavates his grave. F, he must make the decision to be angry. Having decided that someone else or something else is the entire cause of the effect on himself, he makes the decision to be angry. No one can make another person angry. He makes the decision by himself. Then he begins thinking particularly irrationally and expresses his rage by shouting at you, or kicking the dog, attacking a chair, or otherwise assailing, either verbally or physically, anything else that he considers might possibly be the cause. The 4th important key to know about anger is that an angry person will tend to use the emotion to punish others, thereby inflicting suffering, pain, or loss. His computation will be similar to this. Quote, "Since you are cause and I am effect, the angrier that you make me, the more wrong you are. Therefore, the more you deserve to be punished." Unquote. Of course, that is irrational, illogical, and backwards. In fact, the angrier that he becomes, the more he exhibits his own failure to communicate effectively, his own failure to control his environment, and the more he flaunts his own failure to accept responsibility. Using anger to punish others is learned behavior. For example, Kathy, who tried to punish me with her rage and her decision that we must no longer communicate, learned the technique from her mother, who for decades has directed her anger at and withheld communication from people whose views were at variance with hers. Moreover, now, decades later, Kathy's teenage daughter has already learned the same behavior from Kathy. As is often the case in families, the irrationality of trying to punish others with anger continues down the generations, such as from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter and so on. The 5th important key to know about anger is that an, quote, angry, unquote, person is not necessarily angry. People sometimes mock up an attitude of anger just to get a point across or to promote compliance, such as in the technique of a United States Marine Corps drill instructor. So don't make the mistake of automatically assuming that an expression of anger is necessarily irrational behavior. The determining factor is whether the person totally controls his expression of anger or whether his anger even minimally influences him. Lastly, the sixth important key to know about that emotion is that when you are angry, it is high time for a makeover. You will never be less attractive than when you exhibit anger, except for, well, possibly when your body is dead. In brief, true anger is an out-of-control emotional reaction of displeasure exhibited by someone who has first communicated ineffectively, then misunderstood something, then failed to control his environment, become an unwanted effect, denied responsibility for his condition, and finally decided to become angry. Anger proves that the angry person has failed to understand. Of course, any time that you happen to be angry, it applies to you. And then you begin to run the risk of becoming one of those grumpy old people who live down the street. Instead of explaining the emotion of anger in detail, as I have, Einstein stated his universal concept more succinctly. He rightly said, quote, "Anger dwells only in the bosom of fools," unquote. Einstein, however, was speaking outside of his recognized fields of expertise, which were physics and mathematics. As one whose field of expertise is intelligence, and in particular wisdom, allow me to set up and then share with you the deepest secret that you will ever know about the emotion of anger. For the sake of this lecture, and to clarify the point that I'm about to make, let's disregard for the moment everyone who has become merely upset with you at one time or another, and that's probably quite a sizable number. And let's also disregard everyone who has ever become angry with you, which is also probably quite a few people. Now let's forget about any indignant acquaintances who may have had some halfway legitimate reason for being cross with you, such as a contractual misunderstanding, or a property line dispute, or civil litigation. They may not have been happy with you, but they probably did not actually hate you. Now, I'd like you to think for a moment about those who have been so enraged or infuriated or livid with you that they have actually hated you, and hopefully there have not been many. Yet, regardless of whether they have been few or numerous, if you were to list them at the end of your life, you would find that each one of them had once had considerable affinity for you. The deepest secret of anger is this: your hatred of another person is dependent upon and gains its power from the affinity that you felt for that person previously. That is why you will never feel a greater degree of dislike for someone than the animosity that is possible when you have failed to understand something about a person that you have loved the most deeply. In fact, this is the reason that divorces often end with such extreme animosity. In the whole universal concept of anger, that is the essence of it. Accordingly, I cannot help but feel that if everyone in the world understood that single truism, our planet would not wobble at all.